Okay, hopefully I'll have better luck. I recorded this morning, and Zoom actually did crash this morning, and I had a really bad audio on part of it. I forgot to do on the second half. When I came back in, I forgot to turn my video on, my screen share. Uh, so let me turn on the screen share now. There we go. I wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. I would really love to get at least some of an example of each of these labs on video where you guys could look at it when I was not around. Um, the other is one of the things I really want to do is get you guys to a point where you're pulling up Zoom and recording a lab and doing an explanation for other students. I really think it'll help you grasp the material a lot better, and also help you to start developing presentation skills. The purpose of this lab is virtualizing Windows 10 on VMware. And in the lab itself, it is doing it on physical equipment. With the pandemic and online learning, that's just hard. You guys, I don't want you guys doing this on your own personal computers and blowing up the one you use it for everyday work. So virtualization is a good option for this. You know, one of the things that you'll figure out is that in IT, adapting to the environment is pretty much the norm. You know, you're going to know at no point are you going to have the same version. Is it going to be exactly the same? It's not paint by numbers. And I'll show you an example when we get into the setting up the account on the virtual machine. The other thing about this is learning to communicate is important because everything is getting to be project based. For example, it's not the days of being the IT guy and going in a closet and shutting the door behind you and just doing your work is over. Everything you're having to present to the administration, you've got to work with end users, clients. You've got to work in teams to develop projects. Say you're upgrading Active Directory. Say at Francis Tuttle, well, there's the Portland campus, the Rockwell campus, the Reno campus. There's one on Melrose. They've got a biz center out on I-35. They've got a new Danforth campus. So you have to coordinate all that at the same time. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a Type 2 hypervisor. And although there's a number of hypervisors out there, we're going to be using the VMware Workstation. Brief explanation about the types of when I talk about types of hypervisors. Type 1, this is what the cloud is running on. Basically, the hypervisor rides directly on the hardware. It interacts directly with the hardware. And then strictly the guest operating systems run on top of it. There's no applications that run on a Type 1 hypervisor. Some examples of that is ESX, Zen, KVM, which is kernel virtualization module. Unfortunately, that the KVM is kind of a hybrid, so we won't get into that too deep. The ones we're going to be using are Type 2 hypervisors, and basically there is the host operating system that in between the hypervisor and the hardware. This means that the hypervisor is really just another application on that host operating system, whether it's Windows, Linux, Macintosh, Unix, okay? And then the virtual machines run on top of that. Another name for a Type 2 hypervisor is a hosted hypervisor. Basically, it's a virtual machine manager that's installed on, and it's a software application on an existing operating system, and that's what we're going to use. Some of the examples out there are VMware Workstation, which is a commercial, you pay for that. There is VMware Player, which is semi-free version of Workstation. It does not have some of the features like the networking and some of the others, and working in teams. And then Fusion. Fusion is Workstation for Mac. Microsoft has its own hypervisor, which is called HyperV. This actually comes as part of Windows 10 or Server, and you turn it on as a service. Now, be careful. If you turn Hyper-V on, you will not be able to run some of these others. Some of these don't play well together. Used to be you couldn't run VMware Workstation Virtualbox on the same machine. Seems like you can now, but I haven't used it enough to really tell. We're actually going to look, I'm going to do a little video of the same lab on using Hyper-V in NetLab, because that's how the NetLab institutes this lab. There's VirtualBox from Oracle. This is free. We mentioned kernel-based virtual machines. Or KVM is a hybrid. VMware hardware requirements. Now, I say this, if you are trying to install 32-bit operating systems, not as much, but very few operating systems are even being put out in 32-bit. All your Linux there are some, but the majority of them are 64-bit. You need a 64-bit either AMD or Intel processor, probably 2012 or later. This is a little bit, this 3 gig or faster core speed, that can vary depending on the number of cores that you have. Minimum of 2 gigs of RAM, 4 gigs is better, 8 is even better. You're going to have a host operating system. VMware will run on Windows, it'll run on Linux and Apple if you use the Fusion version. One of the things people get hung up a lot of times on this is they meet all those requirements and then it doesn't work. Well, there are in the BIOS, there are some, depending on whether it's Intel. If it's Intel, it'll be Intel VT -X. If it's AMD, it'll be AMD-V Virtualization Technology. That has to be turned on in the BIOS, okay? So how do you know? Well, I'm going to put these links out where you can get to it. And it'll a little bit depend on which technology you're using. The easiest one is to go into your task manager. I'll pull that up real quick and go to performance. And this virtualization is enabled. Okay, so that's a real easy way to check. You can do it from the command line using system information. There are actually some third-party tools that you just download and run. Both AMD and Intel have utilities to identify whether it supports it and whether it's turned on. So there's a number of different ways to do that. But if things are not working, you need to drop back and punt to the beginning and make sure that you've got everything turned on and you meet all the requirements. One of the other bugaboos with this is that Windows requires a license. Well, we had been doing it through something called MSDNAA, which is Microsoft System Developers Network Academic Alliance, and then it was called Imagine, and then it was called, it's been called numerous things. It's now moved to the Azure platform. There's some issues getting you guys on it. So to get around that, we are going to use a evaluation copy of Windows 10. It is good for 90 days. Do not install it on your workstation if you're running 7 or 8, because you will not be able to update it with a key. Okay, it just will not, it'll stop. The link will take you to this. Notice it says 90 days, and it'll tell you numerous times through here it is 90 days only. You have 2 choices. I suggest going with the Enterprise and not the LTSC. That's long-term supply chain or service chain. Basically, it depends on how you want to apply your updates. The enterprise is fine for what you're doing. You actually have to register to get approved for that. So go ahead and just say enterprise, and you don't actually have to fill all that out. One of the things is you're going to download that, and it's going to be an ISO. It's going to be a single file. Notice how this is almost 5.5 gigs. Okay. The important thing about a disk image file is it has all the files that are actually on the DVD or CD, whatever it is. But it also includes the boot portion, which if you just copied the files over to an external hard drive would not have those boot files. Okay, and so I can actually go in and mount that and treat it just like I had a CD. You can also go in and open with Windows Explorer, same thing, and download that file. Now, before you start installing this file, please verify the hash. Okay. That's going to be listed on the same page under prerequisites. The one I have listed here is only good for the ISO I downloaded, and it may change. Go into prerequisites, come down, and I installed English 64-bit. So this is the number right here. Well, gotta get the whole thing. You gotta have the whole thing, no spaces. And what this is, they have run this file through an algorithm that came up with that number. If one bit of this file changes, that number is going to change. So what this does is by verifying it, and I use a product called hashtab or hashtab, and it allows you to go to properties, file hashes. I paste my hash in here. Now, if this is okay, it's going to come up with a green checkbox. If it's not okay, if somebody's gone in and stuck in malware, or I didn't download a good copy, it'll come up with a red X. Okay, this is very important for security. We've looked at, we've talked a little bit about the SolarWinds and the supply side hack that they did. You know, I don't have to get in your system if you download it and put it on yourself. So you want to make sure that you're verifying. Linux actually does that. Most of their patch programs actually check signatures. Not quite the same, but they verify them. Once you've verified, you can use this ISO. Now, you may have noticed that I have MD5 and SHA-1 here. These you see a lot. They have been kind of discredited as breakable. The nice thing I like about this hashtab is you can actually go into settings. I can use any of these hash algorithms to verify, depending on what the publisher puts out there. I prefer SHA 256 or 512, or even SHA-3. The longer they are, the more complex they are, the more secure it is. So once you verified that, there's a couple things I recommend changing on your VMware. The first is the default location on where it's going to store files, and you go into Edit, Preference, and this workspace, default location. By default, this is going to go out and it's going to create a folder in Documents I think it's virtual machines. Well, that's fine, but it puts it down the tree, and it makes it hard to get to. The other thing is for example, in this classroom, that particular every Windows system has in the whatever the boot drive is, it's got a folder called users, and every user has a folder within that keeps their profile and keeps all those folders that we see all the time: downloads, documents, pictures, etc., etc. Well, in the case of Francis Tuttle, we're on a domain, and it's actually what they call a roaming profile, where this particular folder is not even on this computer. It's out on the network, so I can use any computer I want to. So what you do is edit your preferences. You go in and create a folder like this, and this is, I usually just off the root of C, I'll make one called VMware. Okay, I actually could, if you have a have a USB 3 drive that's fairly fast, it'll actually perform fast enough. What you don't want to do is you don't want to be pulling this stuff across the network. Some of these files, let's look and see how big these are. That's almost 2 gig. Let's look at the Windows. The demo will be the biggest of them. So properties. I'd be pulling 16 gigs across the network. It's going to take a long time for that to load. Okay, so I want to keep it local. I want to keep it on something fast. What you're going to do is once you're ready you've got everything set up, we're going to create a new virtual machine. Pretty much we're going to keep everything the default. The only thing we're going to change is we're going to tell it to install the operating system later. Now you can either come up here and go File, New Machine, or you can hit Control N, which will open up this new virtual machine wizard. Leave it at typical. Okay. Now you can actually install from a real DVD or CD that's in your drive. You can install it, and this is what we're going to do a lot. We can install this from an ISO image. The reason I like ISO images is because you know, these things get updated all the time, and they expire. I don't want to have a bunch of DVD optical drive discs laying around. So we're going to use this, but we're not going to install it because it's going to, if you do, it's going to try to use something called easy install, and you will not get the experience of installing Windows 10 or Linux or whatever. Say, I will install it later. Hit next. Now, VM has optimizations for different operating systems. For Windows, it does everything from Windows 10 to server, I believe the new one goes to 2016 or 2019, all the way back to 95 and Windows 3.1. We're doing 64-bit, oops, not Windows 8, Windows 10, okay. If you want Linux, it has all kinds of the major distributions. It's got Debian, it's got CentOS is a spin-off of Red Hat. Debian is one of the big original players. Fedora is a spin-off of Red Hat. There's different versions of SUSE. Novell Linux is actually SUSE. There's OpenSUSE, then there's commercial Red Hat. Oracle has their own desktop system. Red Hat, SUSE, the commercial version. You could even go back, if it's not listed, you can go in and pick a kernel. Here, you can install VMware Hypervisor. So you're actually virtualizing their type 1 hypervisor. This takes some work, so I'm not going to get through this. Other things that you can do is Microsoft DOS, FreeBSD, NetWare, which is Novell, Solaris. But right now we're just doing Windows. But if you want to play around with stuff, there's lots of stuff you can play with. it will go ahead and name, try to create a virtual machine name, based on the operating system. I'm going to do this. It also creates a folder for that virtual machine. And the reason that's important is all these files make up that virtual machine. I don't want to accidentally delete any of them. That's the one I just created. I don't want to accidentally delete a file and ruin my virtual machine. So that's why it puts it in a separate directory. The default on Windows is 60. I usually go down to 30, just because we're going to do some stuff later in the lab. I don't want to do that. I usually split the disk into multiple files. It makes it where the hard drive is no bigger than a 2 gig file, or chunks of 2 gig. Single file, it might be a little bit faster, but if you need to back it up or move it, it's a lot easier in 2 gig chunks. For example, you can put 2 of them on a 4.7 gig DVD. You can put it on a FAT32 external drive. FAT32 will not take files over 2 gig. So go ahead and leave those the same. You can actually customize hardware. You can add memory, and that's always a good thing to do. Number of processors. Now notice this virtualization engine. Remember we talked about those virtualization extensions? Well, you can turn those on for this virtual machine. So this would actually run a hypervisor on top of it. Don't want to do it for what we're doing. Notice the CD is not got anything selected. We're going to go ahead and browse and pick our ISO. Okay, so this is our installation media. This is what the system's going to boot from. My recommendation on this network adapter is change it to bridged. What that does is that creates a virtual interface that is on the same network, the local area network, as the host machine. For purposes of terminology, so we all know what we're talking about, the host machine is the machine that is running this type 2 hypervisor. The guests are the ones that are running on top of it. Now, these three, actually, some people get confused because once you've installed VMware or Virtualbox, you're going to get a little confused because I only have one network card in this. Okay, but you see all these. This first one, this is the physical Ethernet card. If I put this on the guest on bridge, it will actually be on this same subnet. It'll pull an IP address from my DHC server, just like if I plugged a new physical box in. This VNet 1 is actually, that's a virtual adapter that is created that creates a network just between the host and this machine. And then this one is actually, it has a NAT. It's called NAT. It creates virtual machines on a network that's like behind a little home router, if you will. It's doing name address translations. Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close this for right now. I'll come back to it. One of the things that is great about this is you can go to this virtual network editor. And why this is important, say I've got one of these networks and I'm creating machines and I want to move them back to a lab, and I'm locked into a given network. I can't change the IP setting. Well, and you have to have administrative privileges. I can go in here and I can change the network. Like if I wanted this to be 192, 168, 254, I could change that. I can net settings. I can list the network that you real quick. That has my circuit and basically hide the visual circle. And I like to may not do that. Instead of this is the we put this device and say okay. Now, and okay, because I'm doing this with an ISO that has the boot loader on it, it's going ahead and start. Sometimes if you do the universal EFI, it will give you problems. So once you get here, you're good. One thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to snapshots. I take a snapshot and then I come right back to this one. The other thing you're going for is like that. You can do some things like this. You can power and you can suspend the guest. Okay, it's turned off. When I turn that position, it'll come right back where it's stuck. I don't have anything shut down now. It's just inside itself. Now, if you want to delete it, you can go to manage, delete from disk. And this is if you need to delete those files, if you remember I talked about those. I've got another virtual machine here, and I've got some snapshots. This is pre-installed. I'm not sure this is where you click install, and from this point on, it's going to be the same. Okay? And you can follow that pretty much along until you get to the account setup. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and I've got a screenshot. I'm going to go to the account. Oh, no, sorry. The next screen after this is it's going to ask you what kind of install you want to do. And working on this is a little bit confusing sometimes to people. Both of these, I think you actually want this custom. You want the advanced down here. Now, this is the 30 hard drive. It will create a fault running partition for you. One of the things you'll run into though is this is on real quick. If you want to divide and make minimums from 5, keep on them logs on. Okay, this one I got just basically I can do some create some addition later. Okay, so go ahead and do the install. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead on a snapshot because everything is pretty standardized from there on. And what they probably want you to do is they want you to do everything with a Microsoft account so they can keep track of it. One of the problems with that is you end up with a bunch of devices, and these are basically throwaway devices in your profile. So instead of, and it actually says, click offline account and create a local account. And that doesn't work on this one. What you have to do is do join domain instead. And most of these student ones, I just do student and TOR, T-O-O-R, which is the reverse of T-O-O-R. And people spend a lot of time logging into these, and they're not going to exist very long, so security is not a major issue. You guys do security. Now, I just do none. If I have to answer the questions, I know the answer, but it's not real complicated. And I don't really want all the answers to these out in wild, if you will. And at that point, you just go with the defaults. And I'm actually power that off. So we don't sit around that. I've actually got a demo system that I've got up and going. Our snapshot is on. And there's some things you can do to make these virtual machines a lot more usable. Okay, now notice it's not filling out my screen. It uses just standard generic drivers. You might probably get that for somebody else that way. There are what they call VMware tools, which will install, and they actually help the integration. They will customize and optimize the drivers. You'll get one for the mouse, for the keyboard, for the network cards, display, and it'll actually optimize this so it runs a lot better. And basically, if you click the right one, you just right-click the tab and go to install VMware tools. And what it's going to do is going to mount an ISO. There are a number of little small ISOs that are created. It's not and there's actually a run file. Now, I'm actually going to just jump ahead. I don't have one. I need to type one. I'm going to pull that way. And then finish every boot. Now, one thing I didn't mention is go into settings and change this so it doesn't try to use that installation media again and boot right back into the install again. Just put it to the physical drive. But nothing, unless you got music CDs or something in there. Notice how it's filling my screen. And I can actually do a Control-Alt, Enter, and it'll full screen. Do you want to allow your PC to be discovered by the PC device? I say yes, because you're actually on your own network. The question was asked. That's not what I want. And the question was asked about doing some of the labs that require two computers. Well, what you can do is if you set that, remember I said set that to bridge mode, then it should be on. Remember what the host was on my machine? It was 1072 with Francis. So it's actually on the same network as my host machine. My host and guest are actually on the same network. I should be able. I don't remember what the. Let's see what the. Notice now the VMware tool I can copy and paste back and forth between my host and guest, and should be able to ping it. I don't have something that's right. Now I should probably not ping back the other way. Yeah, for the guest, I can ping most. I got something set on my network, my firewall rules. If you're not familiar with them, you set these networks. There are actually multiple. There's private. There's guest Republic, and there's work. Basically, they're firewall. They're very generalized network firewall sets. Guest Republic. Actually, I probably want to be. because this new class, I'm going to do the way I'm going to do it. I'll come back to Hypervisor. The normal one we use, the Pro, and the actually you just go to Home Network and do it from there. You can drag it. Actually, that's a back to again, Control Alt Enter makes it full screen. You can go in, and I have a USB 3 hard drive plugged into my host machine. Oh, come on. I can go to removable devices. This happens to be my camera. This is my soundbar, my printer. This is my fingerprint scanner. Here's my hard drive. I'm connected. And so now I have access to everything that's on that external USB. So I can actually move stuff back and forth fairly easily, drag and drop or through a flash drive. Notice again, the guy in this left-hand corner is saying valid for 90 days. Do not install this on your buddy's computer that you're selling him and expect it to work until he'll come back to you about 90 days ago. About that, any questions? Has anybody played with this at all?
I played with it quite a bit, just like on my own free time, but...
Well, we're going to use this quite a bit. One of the advantages to this is that if you mess it up, like I showed you, I can come back and change the snapshot, and I can go back to the, I can want to take a snapshot, and this is toast, VMware tools. So I can actually flip back and forth relatively quickly. Back a number of years ago, my mother was in a position when she was in the late 70s, early 80s, and was working part-time, and they changed the way that you had to file insurance. And all medical, you don't know, all medical policies, you only pay, you got to do it electronically. And they changed from what they call the 40-10 to the 50-10. And it cost about $80,000, and she's working for a couple afternoons a week, and it just didn't make sense. And so what I did is I found an open source solution. While I was waiting for the hardware to come in, I spent about $800 on a server and a bunch of my time, and sat down and ran through the install about 20 times using snapshots until I had it down. I had everything documented. Then the hardware came in, I could roll in and set it all out. It ended up being there were some other issues with trying to do Medicaid billing, and we ended up going with a cloud solution that was a whole lot cheaper and took a lot less of my time. But it was a good learning experience on how valuable VMware is. You know, when I first started doing this, my office used to sound like I was on the back of an airport because all the computers going. It sounded like I just had a runway outside. But you know, you can have multiple machines going, and the question is about the labs that take two. This is a calculus. This is a distribution that we were going to use in the last couple of courses. What I've done is I've gone in and set it. I don't know how quick it was. I've actually gone in and modified one of the files so that it pauses here. So I have time to hit F2. I got to focus. F2, and now I'm in the BIOS. Okay, so you can actually do optimization systems here. You have to do that in the software on the virtual machines. That shows you some of the stuff that's available on iOS. I mean, in the BIOS. You're not going to see everything, but it's some software that you can run on Windows and get the information. I don't think you can actually change those values from that. I think you actually have to get into the BIOS to change that. There are some tools from Intel for management that will allow you to control all that stuff. But this is what Linux system looks like. It looks not much different. Probably when I retire, I'm going to switch to straight Linux. These are all the tools that this makes a pen testing, security, distribution. Again, that's just shutting these down from the operating systems themselves, rather than just shut down from VMware. And like I said, I'm going to put this out on, when I get, let me stop my recording so I'll see if it's going to actually stop it.